In the long history of Rome, no gladiator's name shines brighter than that of Spartacus, the man who dared to challenge an empire. His story begins far from the Colosseum, in the rugged lands of Thrace, where he was born around 111 BCE. Like many men of his time, he was caught in the web of Rome's expansion. Captured and enslaved, he was sold into the harsh life of a gladiator, trained to fight for the entertainment of Roman crowds. The gladiatorial school of Capua, where Spartacus was held, was no ordinary training ground. It was a prison of blood and discipline, where men were broken down and reforged into weapons. There, Spartacus learned to wield the sword and the shield, but he never forgot the freedom that had been stolen from him. While many of his fellow gladiators accepted their fate, Spartacus dreamed of something greater, not survival, but escape. In 73 BCE, his chance came. Along with about 70 other gladiators, Spartacus broke free from the school, seizing kitchen knives and makeshift weapons. They fled into the countryside, defeating a small Roman force that pursued them. It was the beginning of what history remembers as the Third Servile War. What started as a desperate flight turned into a full-scale rebellion. As word spread, slaves from across the countryside flocked to Spartacus's banner. Within months, his army swelled to tens of thousands. Men and women who had once been crushed under Rome's heel now found hope in the Thracian gladiator. Spartacus proved to be more than just a fighter. He was a brilliant strategist. Using hit-and-run tactics and the rugged terrain of southern Italy, he humiliated Rome's legions time and again. Victories at Mount Vesuvius and along the Italian countryside cemented his reputation as not just a warrior, but a leader capable of defying the world's greatest military power. Yet, Spartacus was no tyrant. Ancient accounts suggest he sought freedom, not endless war. He reportedly wanted to lead his followers north, across the Alps, where they could scatter and live free lives beyond Rome's grasp. But his army, swelling with men hungry for plunder, often pulled him back into conflict. The rebellion became both a cry for liberty and a storm of vengeance. For nearly 2 years, Spartacus and his army marched through Italy, defeating Roman commanders sent to crush him. His victories sent shockwaves through the empire. The Senate, embarrassed and alarmed, finally entrusted Marcus Licinius Crassus with the task of ending the revolt. Crassus built massive fortifications to trap Spartacus in southern Italy. In a final, desperate bid for freedom in 71 BCE, Spartacus led his army into one last battle. The rebels fought fiercely, but Rome's legions proved too strong. Spartacus fell in combat, sword in hand, refusing to retreat. Though his body was never found, his legacy lived on. In punishment, 6,000 of his captured followers were crucified along the Appian Way, a brutal reminder of Rome's power. Yet Rome could never erase the memory of Spartacus. To this day, he is remembered not merely as a gladiator, but as a symbol of resistance, courage, and the unbreakable human spirit. His name outlasted the empire that tried to silence him. Among the countless men who fought in the arena, one stands apart, not because of his skill alone, but because of his crown. Commodus, born in 161 CE, was no ordinary gladiator. He was the son of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, heir to the most powerful throne in the world, and yet he craved the roar of the arena more than the respect of the Senate. His obsession would make him infamous, not as Rome's greatest emperor, but as its strangest gladiator. From an early age, Commodus was indulged. Unlike his father, who valued philosophy and discipline, Commodus preferred spectacle and glory. While Rome's traditions expected emperors to lead armies and govern with wisdom, he sought entertainment. For him, the Colosseum, not the Senate, was the true stage of power. By the time he ascended the throne in 180 CE, Commodus had already shown a fascination with gladiatorial games. As emperor, he pushed this fascination into shocking extremes. Dressed in lavish armor, wielding gilded weapons, he entered the arena to fight before the Roman crowd. But these were not the brutal contests of equals. Commodus carefully arranged his victories. His opponents were often weakened, poorly armed, or even ordered not to strike. Some say he fought wounded gladiators, others that he killed slaves or animals tethered to the ground. Still, to the people, it was a marvel. The emperor himself, slayer of beasts, champion of the games. Commodus even claimed he was the reincarnation of Hercules. He fought with a club like the mythical hero and ordered statues of himself dressed in lion skins, presenting himself as Rome's divine protector. The Colosseum became his temple, and blood became his ritual. But while the masses cheered, the elites despised him. To senators and patricians, the emperor's antics were humiliating. Rome, once proud of its discipline and traditions, now had a ruler more interested in applause than governance. His obsession with the arena drained the treasury, as he demanded vast spectacles to fuel his vanity. Thousands of animals were slaughtered, countless men forced into mock battles, all to glorify Commodus. One of his most infamous performances was the slaying of exotic beasts. Reports claim that Commodus killed 100 lions in a single day. He also enjoyed shocking displays, such as shooting ostriches with arrows and then parading around with their severed heads, taunting senators, as if they too could be hunted. To the common people, he was entertaining. To the nobility, he was dangerous. His reign, marked by cruelty and extravagance, earned him few allies. In the end, it was not an enemy gladiator who defeated him, but betrayal within his own household. On December 31st, 192 CE, a conspiracy of his closest companions plotted his death. The emperor gladiator was strangled in his bath, ending a reign that had transformed Rome's throne into a stage. Commodus remains one of history's most infamous rulers. To some, he was a showman who gave the people what they loved. To others, he was a disgrace who mocked Rome's dignity. But whether admired or despised, Commodus left behind a legacy that no other emperor could claim. He was the ruler who lived and died as a gladiator. In the grand arenas of Rome, where thousands cheered and blood stained the sands, one gladiator stood out not just for his victories, but for the strange choices he made. His name was Flamma, a man whose story became legendary not because he escaped the arena, but because he chose to remain in it again and again. Flamma was not born Roman. He came from Syria, captured in war and forced into slavery. Like so many others, he was sent to the gladiatorial schools where men were trained like weapons, their lives stripped of freedom, their value measured only in skill and spectacle. Yet in this brutal world, Flamma did not simply survive. He thrived. From the first time he entered the arena, the crowd recognized something extraordinary. Flamma fought with ferocity, courage, and skill that set him apart. He was no ordinary gladiator waiting for a chance at freedom. He fought as though the arena itself was his destiny. With sword and shield, he carved his name into the memory of Rome. In the gladiatorial world, victory brought more than glory. It brought the chance for rudis, the wooden sword symbolizing freedom. To earn it was the highest honor a gladiator could achieve, proof that his service and courage had been rewarded. Most who won it seized their chance at liberty, eager to leave behind the blood and danger. But Flamma was different. He was awarded the rudis not once, but 4 times. 4 times he had the chance to walk away from the Colosseum, free to live his life as he pleased. And 4 times he refused. He chose to stay in the arena, to fight again, to risk his life under the eyes of roaring crowds. Why would a man make such a choice? Historians can only guess. Perhaps Flamma had grown so accustomed to the sands and the sword that he could not imagine a life beyond them. Perhaps the honor, fame, and thrill of combat outweighed the uncertainties of freedom. Or perhaps, in the strange and brutal logic of Rome, the arena gave him an identity greater than he ever could have found outside its walls. Over the course of his career, Flamma fought in 34 recorded battles, a staggering number in a world where most gladiators died young. Out of these, he claimed 21 victories, with 9 draws and only 4 defeats. His record made him a star of the Colosseum, admired by both commoners and elites. To the people of Rome, he was more than just entertainment. He was a hero, yet despite his fame, Flamma's life ended as most gladiators' lives did, in the arena. He died at the age of 30, far older than many of his comrades who perished in their 20s. To some, his death was tragic, the waste of a man who could have lived freely. But to others, it was the perfect end for a man who belonged to the... Sans Flamma's story is one of defiance, not against Rome, like Spartacus, but against the very idea of freedom itself. He lived and died as a gladiator, proving that for some men, the roar of the crowd and the clash of steel were worth more than any life outside the arena. Among the many gladiators who bled in Rome's arenas, few became as feared or as respected as Crixus, the fierce Gaul. His name, meaning one with curly hair, may sound simple, but his story is anything but. Known for his raw strength and fiery spirit, Crixus would become one of the most important figures in the greatest slave uprising Rome had ever faced. Crixus was born in Gaul, modern-day France, and, like many others, was captured during Rome's relentless conquests. Torn from his homeland, stripped of his freedom, and sold into slavery, he was forced into the life of a gladiator. He trained at the gladiatorial school of Capua, the same place where another slave-turned-gladiator, Spartacus, was held. Inside the school, Crixus became known for his incredible ferocity in combat. Unlike gladiators who relied on finesse, Crixus was a powerhouse, a warrior who fought with sheer strength and fearlessness. The crowds loved him for it. In every clash of sword and shield, he seemed unstoppable, driven by a deep hatred for those who had enslaved him. But it was not just in the arena that Crixus made his mark. In 73 BCE, when Spartacus led the famous escape from Capua, Crixus was among the rebels. Together with about 70 gladiators, they armed themselves with kitchen knives, clubs, and whatever weapons they could find, cutting their way to freedom. What began as a desperate breakout soon grew into a full rebellion, and Crixus emerged as Spartacus's right-hand man. As the revolt swelled, slaves, farmers, and deserters flocked to their cause, and Crixus quickly became one of the rebellion's most respected leaders. His reputation as a warrior earned him the loyalty of many, particularly among the Gauls and Germans who had joined the revolt. While Spartacus dreamed of leading the rebels north, across the Alps to freedom, Crixus's vision was different. He wanted revenge. To him, the uprising was not just a flight from slavery, it was a chance to strike at Rome itself. This difference in vision would eventually divide the rebels. Spartacus sought escape, but Crixus and his followers hungered for battle and plunder. The two leaders split, each leading their own forces. For Crixus, the decision was fatal. In 72 BCE, he and his men encountered Roman legions in southern Italy. Though they fought with incredible bravery, they were vastly outnumbered and crushed in battle. Crixus himself was killed, but even in death, his defiance could not be silenced. Spartacus, upon learning of his comrade's fall, reportedly honored him with a grim funeral game. In Roman fashion, he forced captured Roman soldiers to fight to the death, a symbolic act of vengeance for the loss of his brother in arms. Though overshadowed by Spartacus in history, Crixus remains remembered as one of the fiercest gladiators and rebel leaders of his time. He embodied the unbreakable spirit of resistance, a man who turned his chains into weapons and chose to fight Rome head-on, even knowing the odds. To this day, Crixus is celebrated not just as a gladiator, but as a warrior whose fury and courage burned bright until the very end. His story reminds us that even in the darkest times, strength and defiance can echo louder than fear. Among the many gladiators who bled in Rome's arenas, few became as feared or as respected as Crixus, the fierce Gaul. His name, meaning one with curly hair, may sound simple, but his story is anything but. Known for his raw strength and fiery spirit, Crixus would become one of the most important figures in the greatest slave uprising Rome had ever faced. Crixus was born in Gaul, modern-day France, and, like many others, was captured during Rome's relentless conquests. Torn from his homeland, stripped of his freedom, and sold into slavery, he was forced into the life of a gladiator. He trained at the gladiatorial school of Capua, the same place where another slave-turned-gladiator, Spartacus, was held. Inside the school, Crixus became known for his incredible ferocity in combat. Unlike gladiators who relied on finesse, Crixus was a powerhouse, a warrior who fought with sheer strength and fearlessness. The crowds loved him for it. In every clash of sword and shield, he seemed unstoppable, driven by a deep hatred for those who had enslaved him. But it was not just in the arena that Crixus made his mark. In 73 BCE, when Spartacus led the famous escape from Capua, Crixus was among the rebels. Together with about 70 gladiators, they armed themselves with kitchen knives, clubs, and whatever weapons they could find, cutting their way to freedom. What began as a desperate breakout soon grew into a full rebellion, and Crixus emerged as Spartacus's right-hand man. As the revolt swelled, slaves, farmers, and deserters flocked to their cause, and Crixus quickly became one of the rebellion's most respected leaders. His reputation as a warrior earned him the loyalty of many, particularly among the Gauls and Germans who had joined the revolt. While Spartacus dreamed of leading the rebels north, across the Alps to freedom, Crixus's vision was different. He wanted revenge. To him, the uprising was not just a flight from slavery. It was a chance to strike at Rome itself. This difference in vision would eventually divide the rebels. Spartacus sought escape, but Crixus and his followers hungered for battle and plunder. The two leaders split, each leading their own forces. For Crixus, the decision was fatal. In 72 BCE, he and his men encountered Roman legions in southern Italy. Though they fought with incredible bravery, they were vastly outnumbered and crushed in battle. Crixus himself was killed, but even in death, his defiance could not be silenced. Spartacus, upon learning of his comrade's fall, reportedly honored him with a grim funeral game. In Roman fashion, he forced captured Roman soldiers to fight to the death, a symbolic act of vengeance for the loss of his brother in arms. Though overshadowed by Spartacus in history, Crixus remains remembered as one of the fiercest gladiators and rebel leaders of his time. He embodied the unbreakable spirit of resistance, a man who turned his chains into weapons and chose to fight Rome head-on, even knowing the odds. To this day, Crixus is celebrated not just as a gladiator, but as a warrior whose fury and courage burned bright until the very end. His story reminds us that even in the darkest times, strength and defiance can echo louder than fear. In the brutal world of gladiators, most fighters were slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war. Yet occasionally, a man stepped into the arena by choice. One of the most remarkable of these was Marcus Attilius, remembered as one of the great underdogs of ancient Rome. His story reminds us that in the Colosseum, even a newcomer could rise to greatness. Unlike Spartacus or Crixus, Attilius was not captured in battle nor sold into slavery. He was a free Roman citizen, a man burdened by heavy debts. In Rome, when debt crushed a man's life, one option was to join the ranks of gladiators. Attilius volunteered to enter the arena, wagering his very survival against the hope of restoring his honor and paying what he owed. For a free man, it was a choice that carried both shame and opportunity. When he first walked into the amphitheater, Attilius was a rookie, untested, unproven, and unknown. But fate had arranged for him a trial by fire. His very first opponent, was no ordinary gladiator but a veteran named Hilarus, a man who had already claimed victory 13 times. To face such an opponent in a debut fight was daunting, and many expected the rookie to fall quickly, another nameless man swallowed by the sands. But Attilius shocked the crowd. With courage and determination, he stood his ground against the seasoned champion. Blow after blow, he fought not as a man defeated, but as one who believed he belonged. The duel stretched on, the air filled with the sound of steel, the roar of the crowd growing with every exchange. Then came the moment of triumph. Attilius struck, defeating Hilarus and seizing his first victory. The arena erupted. In that single fight, the unknown underdog became a name whispered with awe. To defeat a champion in one's very first battle was rare. To do so as a volunteer, a free man who had chosen the life of a gladiator, was extraordinary. Attilius had not only survived, he had made history. His career did not end there. Records suggest that Attilius went on to fight other formidable opponents, including Ratius Felix, another champion with multiple victories. Once again, the rookie triumphed. By now, his reputation was solidified. He was no longer the debtor who had stumbled into the arena. He was Marcus Attilius, the gladiator who defeated champions. What made Attilius remarkable was not just his victories, but what they symbolized. In Rome, where gladiators were often seen as the lowest of the low, Attilius reminded the people that greatness could come from anywhere. His story carried the spirit of hope, proving that even when the odds were stacked against you, courage and determination could turn the tide. Though history does not record the end of Attilius' life, his legend survives through the inscriptions, left behind on amphitheater walls, praising his victories. For the Romans who watched him fight, he was proof that sometimes the underdog could not only rise but conquer. Marcus Attilius remains a symbol of resilience, reminding us that true honor is not measured by birth or status, but by the strength to stand tall when the world expects you to fall. The Colosseum had seen countless battles, but few ever matched the spectacle of the fight between Priscus and Verus. Their story became legendary not for the blood spilled, but for the rare moment of honor and respect that emerged in a world defined by violence. It was the year 80 CE, and the Colosseum, newly built under Emperor Vespasian and completed by his son Titus, was about to open in grand fashion. For its inaugural games, Titus spared no expense. Wild animals from across the empire were brought to Rome, exotic. Displays, mock naval battles, and gladiatorial combats were all staged to dazzle the Roman people. But among the many events, one stood out: the duel between two seasoned gladiators, Priscus and Verus. Both men were veterans of the arena, admired for their skill and bravery. Each had carved a reputation as a fighter who never yielded easily, a man who could face death with unshakable courage. To pit them against each other was to promise the crowd a match unlike any other. And the people of Rome, filling the tiers of the Colosseum, knew they were about to witness something extraordinary. When Priscus and Verus stepped onto the sand, the air trembled with anticipation. The crowd roared, but neither man appeared nervous. Both carried themselves with the poise of warriors who knew their craft and respected their opponent. The signal was given, and the clash began. Steel rang against steel as the two gladiators met in combat. The fight stretched on, neither man able to overpower the other. Blow for blow, strike for strike, they matched each other's strength and cunning. The crowd was enthralled. Hours passed, and still the fight raged, sweat and blood mixing on the sands as both men refused to yield. What made the duel remarkable was not just its length, but its balance. In most gladiatorial combats, one fighter would eventually falter, either from fatigue or wounds. But Priscus and Verus seemed locked in perfect equality. Each time one gained an advantage, the other recovered. Each time the crowd thought the battle was ending, it surged back to life with even greater intensity. At last, the unexpected happened. Both men dropped their weapons at the same time, acknowledging that neither could defeat the other. The Colosseum erupted into chaos, not in anger, but in thunderous applause. The spectacle had become something greater than a fight. It was a display of respect, honor, and shared glory. Emperor Titus, moved by what he had witnessed, rose from his seat. Instead of demanding a victor, he declared both men winners. In a stunning gesture, he awarded them each the rudis, the wooden sword that symbolized freedom. Priscus and Verus walked out of the Colosseum not as defeated men, but as free men, their lives restored by their bravery and skill. This duel remains one of the most famous in Roman history because it defied the bloodthirsty expectations of the arena. Rather than ending in death, it ended in mutual triumph. In a time when gladiators were seen as expendable, Priscus and Verus reminded Rome that even in chains, men could achieve dignity, equality, and honor. Their story endures as a rare moment, when the sands of the Colosseum did not swallow lives, but instead set two gladiators free, forever remembered as equals. In the blood-soaked world of the Roman arena, gladiators often fought men. But there were some whose battles were against something far more terrifying: the wild beasts of the empire. Among them, none were as celebrated as Carpophorus, the greatest bestiarius Rome had ever seen. His legend was carved not through duels with swordsmen, but through impossible encounters with lions, bears, and even mythical creatures of the games. Carpophorus's name became famous during the reign of Emperor Domitian, 8196 CE. Unlike ordinary gladiators, he was trained as a venator, a beast fighter, skilled in hunting and killing exotic animals, brought from every corner of Rome's vast empire. From the deserts of Africa came lions and leopards, from the mountains came bears, and even crocodiles and rhinoceroses were hauled into the arenas. Rome demanded spectacles, and Carpophorus delivered them like no other. What set Carpophorus apart was not just his bravery, but his remarkable skill and agility. Most beast fighters relied on brute force, trying to kill quickly before the animal could tear them apart. Carpophorus, however, fought with precision. He studied the animal's movements, predicted their attacks, and struck with deadly timing. It was said that he moved with the grace of a dancer and the strength of a warrior, making his battles not just bloody, but mesmerizing. The most famous of his performances took place in the Colosseum during one of Domitian's grand spectacles. On a single day, Carpophorus reportedly killed 20 wild beasts with his bare hands and simple weapons. The crowd gasped as he brought down lions, panthers, and bears one after another, displaying both courage and mastery. To the Romans, it was as if the gods themselves had blessed him with supernatural strength. But his most legendary feat involved a creature that straddled the line between myth and reality: the Ethiopian rhinoceros. For the Romans, the rhinoceros was almost a monster, an unstoppable beast with a horn that could pierce shields and men alike. Many gladiators and hunters had died facing it. Yet Carpophorus, with unwavering calm, met the creature in the arena. With agility and precision, he dodged its charges, waiting for the perfect moment. Then, striking with deadly accuracy, he felled the beast before the eyes of thousands. The crowd roared in disbelief. From that day, Carpophorus was celebrated not just as a fighter, but as a legend of the Colosseum. What made his story even more fascinating was that Carpophorus fought not out of desperation, but seemingly out of destiny. His name became synonymous with strength, bravery, and mastery over nature itself. For the Romans, he embodied the empire's power, a man who could conquer the untamed wilds and bring order to chaos. Yet, like many gladiators, his life remains cloaked in mystery. History does not tell us how he died or whether he ever earned his freedom, but his legacy endured in whispers and writings, a reminder that in the heart of the Colosseum, one man stood against the beasts of the earth and triumphed. Carpophorus remains one of Rome's most extraordinary gladiators, a man who fought not men but monsters, and whose courage made him immortal in the memory of history.